Welcome all to the Saphira Center of Shamanism. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. It's an honor to have you back with me. Today, we're going to be discussing vampiric metamorphosis and how that ties in to the process of crossing the abyss from a Qliphothic point of view. We're going to be delving into what vampiric metamorphosis actually is, what it looks like, and how it is the process of transforming yourself from a seeker in an illusionary linear reality to a receiver within your own reality. We're going to be looking at how the vampire archetype is tied in to the divine feminine energy, how they really are the same thing, and how the vampire archetype is linked to the transformation that you go through within the Qliphothic Abyss. We are also going to be delving into the different stages of initiation that you go through when you descend into the Qliphothic Abyss, from the process of opening the abyss ritually, going through the descension process to the bottom of the abyss, and then out the other side. Essential process to understand for anybody who is interested in Kabbalistic initiation, anybody who is interested in what really working with the dark feminine actually does to your body and to your nervous system, so that you understand what you are getting yourself into. Many people don't realize when they are working with these dark feminine archetypes, even just working with Lilith or Hecate, extremely powerful spirits, you are working with high level Qliphothic vampires. Therefore, when you work with these types of spirits, even without initiating into the Qliphoth, you are going to develop more vampiric qualities from a self-development point of view. So, essential subject, so definitely stay tuned. So, vampiric metamorphosis is one of the biggest alchemical transformations that a human being can go through whilst within a physical body. You are reversing everything when you undergo vampiric metamorphosis. It is a process of reversing and inverting everything about who you actually are. But what you are changing into has always been you. You just haven't realized it. It's just been encased in an illusion of patriarchy and seeking. So, vampiric metamorphosis is the process of changing what is positive into negative from the perspective of energy flow. Our nervous systems and energy bodies are naturally wired to operate through what we call a positive Fibonacci sequence, which is a positive spiral. You could call it a positive field or torsion field. Okay, which basically is like the positive charge on a battery. Yeah, it pushes energy out, it reaches for its sense of self, it seeks its sense of self. Okay, and that is how our world is wired by default. That is the patriarchal system, operating through an illusion of a linear reality whereby one thing leads to another and reality is set in stone. That is the very definition of the wounded masculine energy that our multiverse is basically functioning from. So that seeker state of consciousness is the state of being that reaches outwards, reaches outside of itself in order to define its sense of self. Okay, basically, it's the false self. Okay, the illusion of who you think you are that is defined by external means. This programming starts within childhood when just simply being born into a physical body, and then it continues to unfold through the individual level trauma and programming that we undergo, causing us to leave our truth and authenticity outside of us whilst we grow into what the world wants us to be. Okay, we are molded into tangible avatars to be able to function within a wounded masculine patriarchal system that basically creates the illusion that reality is completely linear. Okay, that once we get to here, then we get to here. Once we get to there, then we get to there. There is no bigger illusion than that. Okay, if you look around you, every aspect of humanity is operating from a place of needing to attain something that is outside of itself in order to define that particular meaning for itself. As I've mentioned in previous videos, this does have evolutionary potential behind it. In a way, it is about choosing the mask, choosing the role that is definable and closest aligned to our truth and authenticity. The problem comes when the majority of humanity is operating from the illusion, is operating from obligation, and doesn't understand its own sovereignty at all, and has actually learnt through the patriarchal programming brought by numerous religions and other types of patriarchal programming. It causes us to place our own sovereignty into an external divinity without acknowledging it from within. And that in itself is a wounded masculine state of consciousness. That is what we call the positive Fibonacci sequence that pushes energy outwards, okay? It radiates energy outwards in order to seek its sense of self through external means and external validation that isn't actually helpful and that actually distances oneself even more from one's truth and authenticity. So the process of vampiric metamorphosis is to go through a significant death, or should I say continuous deaths, to this illusion. Okay, it is somewhat of an annihilation of your sense of self, a complete identity and social reset on every level of your consciousness so that you can basically shatter those illusionary identities that are operating from that seeker energy so that you can embody the divine feminine archetype of the receiver. Okay, so when you are going through, or when you've gone through a process of vampiric metamorphosis, you are no longer operating from a place of reaching outside of yourself. You're no longer operating from a place of seeking things that are outside of you in order to define you by, because that is just going to feed the false self, and in most cases is going to feed a false self that isn't actually you and actually distances you from your true sovereignty and authenticity as a whole. So the process of transforming into a vampire, symbolically speaking, is to undergo a significant death, energetically speaking. The foundations of everything in your life need to fall apart so that you are left completely bare, raw, with only your heart's essence remaining, so that you can then learn that you come from a divine feminine space. We all come from a womb, physically speaking, and on the soul level as well. We are pieces of pure potential, defining meaning for ourselves within a positively charged multiverse. And that positively charged multiverse has to exist in order for our sense of self to be defined. But when that sense of self is built out of trauma and obligation and fear, and out of simply learning that our sense of self-value is only defined by the things that we have attained in our lives, whether it's through knowledge, money, experience, those sorts of things. That is extremely destructive. It causes us to be completely detached from our sovereignty, and therefore everything that we strive to attain outside of ourselves becomes basically a mechanism to feed the false self, which is there specifically to separate us from our inner child and from our own power and potential that is already existing within us, that is not acquired through a given experience or through acquiring a qualification or through something that you've undergone within your life. You are not your experiences. You are not anything that you are reaching for outside of you. What you actually are is pure potential. That pure potential is a paradox. Okay, that paradox is what is negative actually becomes positive. So when you are receiving and you learn to receive your reality instead of seek it, you are embodying an optimally magnetic state of consciousness, an optimally magnetic state of consciousness whereby the illusion of needing to seek things outside of you is completely annihilated, so that you can then basically vampirize the reality around you, and through resonance alone pull in the energy that you need within your day-to-day life. That is what true vampirism actually is. If we look at a mythological representation of a vampire, okay, a vampire is created. If you look at vampire movies, The Lost Boys is one that come to mind. If you haven't watched The Lost Boys, watch The Lost Boys. It has a lot of very powerful occult symbolism in it, particularly when it comes to the abyss and how the abyss is actually the transformation point in order to transform oneself into a vampire, metaphorically speaking, and you could say literally speaking as well in many cases, but I will get to that in a moment. In a lot of these mythological stories, vampires are created through death. Okay, so basically somebody has to die to who they were, to their human consciousness, in order to then be defined as a vampire. Okay, in the Lost Boys, for example, Michael, the main character, becomes a vampire by drinking the blood of somebody within that vampire coven who is obviously already a vampire. And then he starts to go through that natural metamorphosis process. And there's a scene where they're all hanging from a bridge over a huge chasm, huge abyss. And in order for his vampiric metamorphosis to be successful, he has to let himself fall. Okay, and the other vampires are saying, let go, you're one of us now. Okay, and that is exactly referring to the crossing of the abyss and how that is a necessary step to undertake in order for one to undergo real vampiric metamorphosis. Okay, so to put it simply, you are reversing who you are. Okay, you are basically decoding who you thought that you were when you become a vampiric archetype. You're decoding who you thought that you were in order to move back to a void level of consciousness. And a void level of consciousness is empty. Okay, completely empty. Okay, the void is empty, full of emptiness, full of infinite nothing. So in a way, you have to symbolically become nothing. Okay, in other words, you have to annihilate the illusions that have been defining your false sense of self so that you can really transform into your truth and authenticity, which is emptiness. Okay, that empty state of consciousness, which is brought by the void, is empty for a reason, because it is not predefined by anything. Okay, the darkness, the dark matter energy, there's a reason why power exists within the darkness. And that's because it doesn't have any form. Okay, the light is extremely powerful in itself, but because it already has a predefined form, it's there to basically give form to the darkness. So if we are born into a multiverse like we have been, that already has predefined constructs, and then we're wired into that state of operating from within these predefined constructs, even if it is at our evolutionary detriment to actually do so, then we're not living reality in full harmony with our true divinity, which is who we actually are. So when we merge with dark matter energy and we become somewhat of an aspect of dark matter itself through vampiric metamorphosis, we are merging with our pure state of void. Okay, and that void state is nothing. It's not defined by anything. There is no predefined structure within the void. Okay, our reality is surrounded by emptiness. Okay, our multiverse is surrounded by the void. The void is the place, the liminal space that holds the worlds together. the liminal space of infinite dark matter energy that has nothing in it. But because it has nothing in it, there is room for new multiverses to be birthed within it. Okay, and this is why somebody who has gone through vampiric metamorphosis, through, say, the crossing of the abyss, which I will talk about in a moment, there's a reason why they are referred to as receivers or great attractors, because they've gone through the deconstruction of all of the illusionary constructs that are defining their sense of self. As I said, it's like an identity and social reset on all levels of your being. It will change you significantly. You will not be the same person. You will not fit into the same relationships, the same friendships, the same jobs. You will not be the same. You will be empty, nothing left. And that is a very strange feeling, okay? When you've got nothing left within you, you've got nothing, no construct left to define yourself by. Yeah, you can't call yourself anything. You can't call yourself, I'm not a therapist anymore. I'm not a shaman anymore. I'm not even an occultist. I'm not even a black magician. I'm not even a bloody vampire. It's all gone. Yeah, it's all gone. But that means that there is room to create a new fluid multiverse in accordance to you. So becoming a vampire archetype is a process of decoding your own personal multiverse on the microcosmic level. Okay, and that has a ripple effect when you do that. Okay, because you are going through so much dissolving of the illusion, so much dissolving of the false self, and you reach the bottom of the abyss in total nothingness, total despair. Once that is embraced, you can learn how to dwell within that formless space, not actually defining yourself by anything other than the things that are actually in alignment with your truth and authenticity. Okay, it basically means that it is a paradox. Okay, when you are deconstructing your illusions, you are basically going through the continuous tower moment. Yeah, you're breaking apart that old construct completely. The tower is falling, the form is breaking down, but then you are opening yourself up to something new and more authentic to be embraced. Okay, and the void is a paradox. The abyss is a paradox. When you're going through the deconstruction, you are going through it to rebuild. Okay, to build something completely new, something more fluid, something that actually fits with the continuous evolution of your soul. Many people try and create their reality through manifestation techniques, positive affirmations, all of these different things, as valid as that is and as successful as that can be. There is already a pre-constructed form, a pre-constructed reality that is in the way. Okay, and what that basically means is that the false self is already constructed with those predefined belief systems and patterns. So that basically means that the only things that are going to be able to manifest within one's day-to-day reality using the false self are going to have to feed the false self. So then we work towards actually cultivating a reality that doesn't actually connect us to our soul at all and actually feeds this illusionary patriarchal system of us having self-value by how much money we have and how much experience we've had or a particular title that we've spent years attaining. That's illusionary. The best way to manifest is to deconstruct. That is the ultimate paradox, okay? Understanding that creation has to come through a paradox, okay? Everything around you, in order for something new to be born, referring specifically to nature here, the old has to die, okay? Everything around you, you see everything outside, okay? Outside, there's a very beautiful tree over there, yeah? And it's just at the beginning of summer here in the UK. Everything has bloomed, everything's beautiful. Okay, but everything is going to need to grow. Everything is going to need to change. So that means that it needs to die. The death is essential. It needs to go through that natural death in order for that new construct, that new sense of self to be reborn. And that is the purpose of the void. That's the purpose of vampiric metamorphosis. Completely dying to your old self, completely dying to the illusion, so that you can then reconstruct the illusion in a way that is actually going to serve the evolution of your soul. Because by default, the false self, the false constructs are created to encase the inner child, encase the soul's essence, and actually make us more distant from it. Okay, I'll give you an example, okay, of something that people have trouble understanding in this particular example. So, in order for somebody to, if somebody wanted to say, okay, become a doctor, or I use a more spiritual example, someone wants to become a shaman, okay, we need to look at why someone wants to define themselves as a shaman, okay? What does that actually mean? Okay, what does it mean to be a shaman? Okay, they define that sense of self. But what are you beyond that? What are you beyond the shaman? What are you beyond that particular aspect that you are then seeking outside of you to be able to then define your sense of self by? What are you outside of the shaman? Go even deeper than that. What are you when you're not a mother? What are you when you're not a son? What are you when you are not defined by anything in particular? And that is a question that many people struggle to answer, because we then realize when we really delve into it that often the real intention to be these things in the first place, as much as it does have a co-creative intention behind it, the real intention is actually completely hidden, because the soul doesn't care what it's defined by. The soul cares about evolution. The soul cares about the reality being aligned to why it's actually come there in the first place. And if I call myself a shaman and I define myself as a shaman, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But what if I'm defining myself as that particular title because who I actually am and my true vulnerability is too scary to actually look at and too scary to actually let out? What if your true sense of self-value, your true value as a soul, was already there when you were born into a physical body? What if your inner child just doesn't want to be anything anymore, doesn't want to feel like it has to try and be something in order to define its sense of self by? This is the danger of the false self. This is the danger of the linear reality, because it wires us into this state of being whereby we are trying to control our inner child, make our inner child become something in order to fit into the world, just the same as what happened to us as children, through going to school, receiving that individual level programming, through being at home, whatever it was that happened, going through the trauma that took place. By default, everything is being formed. Our sense of self is being formed by pure obligation and nothing more. So vampiric metamorphosis, you are inverting that. And in order to do that, the illusion has to die. The illusion has to die. You have to descend into your pure potential, which is not anything, because it's everything at the same time. It's nothing and everything at the same time. The void is emptiness, but it is also the place where realities are born. So the whole point of shifting from the seeker into the receiver is to decode the illusion, free your inner child that has been trapped within these obligations of the external world, in order to then receive your reality, in order to then cultivate a new reality through resonance alone. And this is a very potent journey into your deep unconscious. What I'm referring to when I say really undergoing vampiric metamorphosis, what I'm really referring to by saying that is the process of crossing the abyss in Qliphothic terms. The abyss being the chasm that separates the higher wisdom, the higher levels of wisdom and understanding from the lower densities. When you are ascending through the Qliphoth, I might as well put the Qliphoth here. When you are ascending, or should I say descending, through the Qliphoth, you are moving through currents of energy that represent negatively polarized forces, which means that you are blackening your nervous system, blackening your energy field. Doesn't mean you're becoming evil, but what it means is that you are going through these different spheres and connecting tunnels in order to shed more of the illusion. Okay, each sphere is representative of or representing a whole share of different shells that are basically representing your false self. Okay, who you think that you are. Okay, if we talk about the first sphere or the first and second sphere, referring specifically to Nehemoth and Gamaliel, ruled by Lilith and Lilith's sister Namar, we are referring to the lower centers here. Yeah, the sacral and the root centers. When we are opening these qliphothic shells, and qliphoth means shell or husk, when we are opening these qliphothic shells, we are willingly cracking open the false self to reveal the pure potential that is underneath. What happens is that you will then go through a process of shedding the layers of your false self that are associated with that particular sphere and that particular energy center within your nervous system. So when we are working with the root and the sacral here, we are basically cracking open our life force, cracking open our sexual energy, which means that you have to be willing to shed the false self, which has been encasing your true sexuality. Okay, your true sexual energy, your true life force. And that means facing the trauma that is associated with the sexual energy as a whole, facing your sexual trauma. Okay, and sexual trauma does not happen just through, if you're abused as a child physically, it's not just that. Anything that is intangible, projection of shame, affects the child's life force and therefore is going to affect the sexual energy and how they feel comfortable to emanate that energy in the external world. So a lot of us are holding on to sexual trauma without actually realizing it, but the majority of people are holding on to this on the more covert level. Anything intangible that affects the child's self-esteem, passing comments, comments on pictures that were drawn, comments on looks, anything like that impacts the sexual energy. So using the bottom two qliphothic spheres as an example, you are breaking the shells that are encasing that true sense of sexual sovereignty. Okay, and that's what Lilith is all about, sexual alchemy. Okay, facing and integrating everything that society has deemed as ugly or nasty about yourself is what these first two spheres are very much focused towards. Okay, they're very similar to each other, Gamaliel and Nehemoth. They're very similar in the sense that Gamaliel is basically a more dense version of, no, sorry, Nehemoth is a more dense version of Gamaliel because we're basically talking about the earth plane and the astral plane here. So they're mirrors of each other. And this happens throughout the different stages of the Qliphoth. Okay, when you move up to Samael, you are facing your pre-constructed ego. Okay, so Samael being the shadow aspect of Hod, Hod being the sphere of Mercury on the tree of life, representing logic, intellect, and balanced analysis, you are embodying the opposite to that. Okay, when you are moving into Samael. Okay, you are embodying everything that twists logic and analysis. So you're facing and dissolving the illusions of your ego. So Samael can create the illusion that you are actually losing the plot, going mad. Then you face a Rabzarak, which is a different level of dissolving. Okay, breaking the shells that are really encasing your coping mechanisms. Okay, we're talking about the shadow aspect of Netzach here, which is all about that Venusian energy, that clear creative flow, the flow of emotions, emotional intelligence. You are facing everything about yourself that has twisted those qualities. Okay, so you're going to be facing coping mechanisms. You're going to be facing insecurities. Extremely dissolving sphere is a Rabzarak. You move to Thagirion, you're going to face everything that you have basically put up in order to create an act for yourself. Okay, so you're facing everything that is pretend. Thagirion being the shadow aspect of Tifereth basically represents that equilibrium. Being the middle of the tree represents that equilibrium between the spiritual world and the physical, tangible experience. Here, you are facing everything that is pretend. Okay, Thagirion is a very quiet, very eerie sphere, the sphere of the black sun, which dissolves illusion and recreates truth. So when you're facing Thagirion, you're facing everything that you have created in a way to kind of portray yourself in a certain way. Then you get to Golachab. You get to Golachab. Golachab by many is seen as the most intense sphere or the most tangible sphere within the Qliphothic tree. You get to Golachab and you face Asmodeus. You face the 9 circles of hell. Golachab, you are stepping into the furnace and you are letting the illusion burn away. And this sphere literally creates the sensation that your whole body is on fire. Okay, that's at least what it manifested for me and my partner. Like, even though she wasn't going through it, she still got that feeling of her energy field being completely on fire, her body being completely on fire. Okay, and that is what Golachab does. It takes you through the shadows of desire. Okay, it dissolves everything about your false self. Very feminine sphere in the sense that it really takes you inside and understanding and helps you to understand how you have been imprisoning your own inner child. You really realize here how the 9 circles of hell representing the different torture zones for the human soul, you realize that the human soul is actually symbolic of the inner child. So you're basically facing here the different torture zones that your inner child is dwelled within and are making the commitment to basically go and retrieve the inner child parts that are being tortured within this particular realm. Okay, it's also an extremely sexual sphere, Golachab. I personally really enjoy Golachab because I really like things that are intense. I find things that are more intangible, more challenging. So, like Thagirion, the sphere before, that was a lot more like intangible in the sense of like just illusions being revealed, that sort of thing. That was just an intangible energy for me. Whereas Golachab, I'm like, yes, I'm liking this. This is fire. This is beautiful. Yeah, it was like I really resonated with Golachab personally. Okay, you dissolve everything about who you think that you are in Golachab and you realize your potential behind that. Okay, you are facing the twisted aspects of your sexual energy within Golachab. You are facing the twisted aspects of your life force, turning unprocessed anger and rage into pure passion. And if you are willing to process anger and rage and actually turn it into passion, which is the key to actually integrating anger and rage to actually meet your needs, then Golachab will be quite an easy sphere for you. You then get into Ga'ag Shibla. Okay, and Ga'ag Shibla is the pit of desire. Okay, this here where your desires are dissolved. Okay, you are tested through means of material desire, material gain. If you have addictions, it's quite likely that Ga'ag Shibla will bring it back up to the surface to be processed and integrated. So if somebody has, say, for example, if they used to have a problem with alcohol, they put the alcohol down but didn't actually deal with the trauma that was behind the addiction, then it's very likely to come back up when you reach Ga'ag Shibla. And Ga'ag Shibla is really kind of dissolving the illusion of desire. Astrally, this sphere really appeared as a sort of just almost like a beautiful chamber with all of these banquet tables and all of these like fancy foods on them and temptations on them. And at the end of that chamber was a big mirror. And when I looked at myself in that mirror, my whole face would kind of melt like wax. Okay. And that's symbolic of the illusions melting away. Okay. Your desires melting away. It's in this sphere where you realize the illusions of your desires and how a lot of your desires have been fueled by lack completely, have been fueled by the obligations of the external world. And then once you've gone through those lower 7 spheres, once you've gone through all of that dissolving, okay, each sphere is going to have a process of death where you let go of who you are in order to embrace who you're actually becoming. So you're basically undergoing death after death after death after death after death. And this has prepared you to go through the ultimate vampiric metamorphosis that is brought by crossing the abyss, crossing the Daath. Okay, and crossing the Daath is a highly complex process. Okay, everybody has different experiences within the Daath as they do within the other spheres. But as we spoke about, when it comes to vampiric metamorphosis, it happens through death. It's emerging with death. Okay, if you look at the mythological stories, vampires are created through death. Okay, they die to their old self. So going through those lower spheres has prepared your system to go through the ultimate annihilation of who you think you are, the ultimate annihilation of the, I don't want to say the ego because you're not actually annihilating your ego, but you're annihilating the false constructs that the ego is holding onto. Okay, so the abyss has numerous different stages to it. Okay, and it does mirror somewhat of the process of actually descending into a black hole. The abyss is the black hole. And when you are basically initiating into the abyss, you are becoming the Death Star, okay, becoming an aspect of the black hole itself. Okay, and the Death Star or slash the black hole is symbolic here. When a star dies, it goes through a particular alchemical transformation and turns into an optimally magnetic state of dark matter energy that pulls in all of the form around it and dissolves it. Okay, and that is symbolically what, and literally, what happens when you cross the Daath. Okay, for many people, it is a very gradual process of descent. Okay, for each of the initiations, you're performing an initiatory ritual to open that given sphere. And when you open the Daath, you are basically inviting the void's energy, the abyssal energies, into your body and being willing to undergo the necessary transformation that is required for you to develop that, what you could call that vampire archetype, which is that pure receiver energy. Okay, what you are doing here is that you are merging with the ultimate divine feminine realm, and you are becoming an aspect of the divine feminine itself. Okay, you are becoming the great receiver. So once you've performed the initiatory ritual, the first stage unfolds, which I like to call the initial descent. Okay, where it is often a gradual descent. Okay, some of the other people I've spoken to who have been through this experience or claim to have been through this experience do report similar in the sense that it's not like they perform the ritual and then the next day they're right in the pit of the abyss. Obviously, everyone's journey is different. I'm just explaining it from my personal gnosis here, but often it will be a very gradual descent. Okay, there's a descent, a very long descent, and then there is a re-emergence phase. Okay, so the gradual descent may seem very quiet at first. Again, this is my personal gnosis. It may seem very quiet at first, okay? But as things go on, reality will start to make less and less sense. Okay, it's almost like you really start to get experiences within the abyss as to like nothing really makes sense anymore. Okay, like I can't define what I'm actually experiencing here. It's just completely intangible. It's very subtle, at least for me, it was extremely subtle at first. Okay, it's like I did feel like I was descending, and I would also get very interesting synchronicities with seeing black holes whenever I went on the internet. So if I like went onto like a website or something, um, and there was like a website ad, there would be like a picture of a black hole that basically was showing the different stages of descending into a black hole, right to the spaghettification process, to the emergence process. And it was basically saying, it literally said, you are here. And that is like the initial descent process. And when we're looking at it from a self-development point of view, this is where your reality basically starts to make less and less sense. Okay, so the sort of initial foundations of your false self are beginning to fall away. But it's bearable. At least for me, it was bearable. You then start to descend more and more, and then what can happen is that an illusion of grandeur can form. Okay, and this is Choronzon's speciality. Okay, Choronzon is the beast of the abyss. Okay, the feminine aspect that rules over the Qliphothic Abyss, and he is the personification of the false constructs of the ego. So he will test you through illusions of grandeur. Okay, he will test you through you thinking that you have got further than you have. And people who fail this test often think that they have crossed the abyss in like 2 weeks to a month. Okay, it's like, oh, it's been 2 weeks, nothing huge has happened, but it's like, oh, I must have crossed the abyss successfully. Okay, don't be fooled by that. Okay, that is a personification, that is a manifestation of Choronzon. Okay, this is why the abyss can be quite a disorientating process. Okay, so the illusions of grandeur can kick in often around the 1 to 2 week mark. If you're still not experiencing any dense trials, then it can manifest in that way. Okay, for me, it manifested in a way of feeling like I needed to repeat the initiatory ritual again. Okay, and I actually repeated the initiatory ritual 3 times. I probably didn't need to do that. However, I am glad that I did it as well because I also felt like that was what was needed in my personal journey. But I'm also aware that that was something I needed to experience in order to understand how Choronzon actually works and the types of thoughts that he cultivates within you. So you can, as you start to descend through that initial descension process, you're dissolving, and then the disorientation can start to kick in. Okay, you can really feel very confusing, like the path just gets completely mystified. It's like you can't see what's directly in front of you, and it now gets to the point where it's like, okay, I really have to take it one day at a time here. When you're exiting that initial descent process, you are moving through the process of what I like to call the event horizon. Okay, whereby you are passing through the point of no return. Okay, and this is basically when chaos can start to unfold. Okay, and what often happens here is something external will happen to trigger a very deep internal process of dissolution. And this is something which, if you explained it to somebody else, they wouldn't understand it. Okay, because it's a highly internal, extremely psychological process, is the crossing of the Qliphothic Abyss. Extremely psychological, and it does test you through endurance. Yeah, so big situations can unfold, relationships can fall apart. Literally, this is when you pass through that point of no return. That's when the real dissolving starts to happen. The dissolution, the real tower moments start to come in. Like, oh my God, nothing's what it seemed. Oh my God, I'm realizing how much I've been lying to myself. Oh my God, how I was living my life was not actually in alignment with my truth in any way whatsoever. And that process just kind of continues for quite an extensive period of time. Don't get me wrong, it's not like you're always conscious of what's falling away. This is the challenge with the abyss. You're not actually always conscious as to what's actually happening, but you know that you are going through so much change to the point where you can't actually define the change that you're going through with human dialogue in any way, shape, or form. All you know is that your whole body and nervous system is being significantly transfigured because of the amount of dissolving that you're going through. And all of that distortion is very much part of the process because that's what happens when the ego is scrambling for an identity. Okay, and your ego is going to be always searching for an identity to attach to. So when you go through that dissolution phase, it feels confusing because your ego starts scrambling, and it's amazing the highly intelligent ways that your ego finds to hold on. Okay, and it's very interesting when it starts to hide within spiritual practices as well. Like for me, it was hiding in doing like invocations, yeah, or using too much tarot. Yeah, so it's like it's amazing what the ego can do to try and hold on when it knows that the foundation of what it actually is being completely shattered. Yeah. So you go through that continuous dissolving process. Once you've moved past the event horizon, you pass the point of no return, you then reach the final tower moment, yeah, which is the final dissolution of the false self as you know it. And then you reach the bottom of the abyss, okay, which is often accompanied by feelings of immense despair, immense hopelessness, and basically everything that you have repressed at the deepest corners of your psyche. It's here where you can even start to feel suicidal. You can start to feel, get this kind of suicidal thoughts coming in. And this is why it's important to have a solid foundation and to have gone through and spent a significant amount of time in the lower spheres before going through this process, because you're going to start to tap into portions of your unconscious mind that are so repressed and exiled completely that it doesn't always feel comfortable in that way. So once you've reached the kind of bottom of the abyss, all of the dissolving has happened, you're then at a point where you reach a state of being which I like to call fertile soil, yeah, which is basically like seeds have been planted for a new self to be birthed, but that new self is not born yet. Yeah. So you're basically just kind of suspended, like in this kind of meaningless space. Yeah, and everything around you doesn't really have a definitive meaning. And it's just kind of like you've been through all of this dissolution, and then you're just like, I don't really know who I am. Yeah, I don't know who I am. Who you know that you've changed on a significant level, but you don't know how or why, or you don't know how it's going to unfold. And this is the part of the journey that really requires optimal patience. This is where you cannot be pushed or, you know, pushed into obligation from the external world of needing to kind of like make a decision as to where you are or make a decision as to where you stand or these kinds of things, and it's here where you will receive tests that will kind of try and push you back into that sort of what I call the sort of coronzonic, if that's even a word, thought patterns of distortion where you're kind of cycling in the egoic structures without letting go of them. Yeah, so it's here where it really requires that kind of optimal presence with where you are. People around you will not understand what it is that you're going through, so completely let go of that in that regard. Yeah, particularly family members, friends, relationship dynamics. It's even if they are like really, spiritually aware, they're not going to understand what it is that you're going through, and you're going to look pretty bloody weird when you go through this process. At times it may even look like you're kind of like borderline psychosis. You're not. It's a part of the process, but from an outsider's perspective looking in, it's very difficult for people who are outside of you to be able to comprehend this process. Okay. When you're at the bottom of the abyss, okay, and you've welcomed that energy and you're just present, you're in that no man's land, you will then tap into the scariest feeling in your unconscious mind that you have learnt is the most dangerous to feel, and that's hope. Genuine hope, light, love, unconditional love. That is at the bottom of the abyss. That is fueling the divine feminine. That is fueling new realities to be born. And you realize that even at the bottom of the abyss, there is ecstasy, a divine ecstasy that you can't quite explain because, again, it's completely intangible. But then the question goes, what is more scary than that genuine hope? What is more scary than actually embodying that pure hope? And it's here where you really realize that your inner child just wants to be free. Yeah, your inner child doesn't want to be defined as anything, doesn't want to try and be something to fit into the world. It wants to know that it's enough already without feeling like it needs to be anything. And for many people, this is where the true will comes through, where you really start to understand your needs. But again, it's still at a point where it's not quite tangible. And that sort of tangible energy is then elaborated on and then brought by the later stages of initiation through the supernal triad. Once you tap into that space and you are willing to actually sit here and integrate your own sovereignty, This is the key vampiric transformation. You've just let go of everything. You've gone through all of that dissolving. Now you are here at the center of the abyss, and you have to understand your own sovereignty. And you have to take time to integrate that sovereignty and bring it into the day-to-day life. And this is genuine sovereignty. Genuine sovereignty that knows that it is enough. And when the inner child knows that it is enough, that is the optimal manifestation state. That is the optimally successful magnetic state. It's that self-value that is already there. So then you pull in what the true will needs in order to grow and evolve effortlessly. And then the re-emergence phase happens. Okay, and that will probably take about the amount of time that it took to actually descend into the abyss in the first place. Okay. This re-emergence phase, in my experience, will take as long as descending into the abyss. So it's basically half you're descending, and then the other half you're learning how to, you're basically being sort of re-established. Okay, re-established in this kind of void-like fluid consciousness, a void-like consciousness that is not actually defined by any given thing. And that re-emergence phase happens through very much mirroring. Okay, you go through the opposite of the tower moment. It's rebuilding something new. You then pass the point of no return once again via the white hole, where nothing actually gets in. Yeah, you pass that point of no return on the white hole, which is the opposite to the black hole. You pass the point of no return, whereby this is your sovereignty integrated, and it's so solid that nothing is going to be able to break it. Okay, that is the point of no return on the white hole, on the re-emergence from the abyss. Once you've integrated that sovereignty and you've made it solid, then a new sense of self will start to establish as you move through the later stages of the crossing. Okay, and then naturally, Satariel will be waiting for you on the other side to help you to integrate that sovereignty. Satariel is then an initiation, first initiation into the supernal triad, acting as a core turning point within the Qliphothic journey, that is one that, as being the sphere of Saturn, known as the divine feminine, the highest sphere on the dark pillar of severity, you face the unknown. Okay, ruled by Lucifer Occult. Things happen within your day-to-day whereby you need to then, take that sovereignty that you've gained from the abyss and actually put it into practice, whilst actually learning how to be in that unknown space. Okay, and understanding that even when you get to the end of the abyss, you are still in the void, because Satariel is the concealer. Okay, your true will exists within the sphere of inverted understanding. So you have to face everything that has been clouding your judgment. And this is where you learn to see in the dark. And this is the vampiric transformation. The descent, the release of the false self, and then the ascent. Okay, the formation of a new multiverse that is more fluid and more tailored to be able to fit the evolution of your soul. And that is what a real vampire is in regards to self-evolution. You are decoding the illusion that wires you into a space of seeking and reaching for things that are outside of you. And then you are embodying a state of consciousness that is purely receptive. Okay, a state of consciousness that does not need to define its sense of self. That doesn't need to define its sense of self. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have moments. Doesn't mean that your trauma is completely healed. It's the opposite of what it means, actually. What you've just done by going through that experience is make yourself even more vulnerable, even more sensitive for more repressed trauma to come to the surface later on. But what that process has done is that it's just taken you through that full metamorphosis of the vampire. So you're now dwelling, in a sense, symbolically and literally, within the void space, not defining your sense of self by anything that is latched onto via external means. And through the shadow integration that you've gone through in that process, that is an optimally magnetic state that will open up a whole new path of initiations beyond that. Then eventually you'll reach into the if you go this far, you'll reach into the Qliphothic initiations, which are beyond any form of structure, where you face more abyssal trials, more abyssal energy, just more intense. Ongoing, ongoing, and ongoing, going through deeper levels of dissolving, deeper levels of metamorphosis in order to connect to more aspects of your void energy, more aspects of your pure potential from within a physical body. So when people say that the Daath reverses your energy field, that happens both literally and metaphorically. Okay, simply because what sustains you as a human being will change once you go through the Daath. Okay, you will not be needing the same things that you were seeking. Okay, therefore, you're not going to be seeking sustenance through those external means, but you are going to be seeking sustenance in a different way by embodying the emptiness. Okay, embodying the emptiness that is the void that births entire realities into being. So yes, the Daath reverses the energy field in the sense that you are becoming optimally magnetic, but what is positive becomes negative. But in doing so, because it's the whole thing as a paradox, what is negative also becomes positive. So that means that when you are going through that process of inverting your nervous system to sustain itself differently, to sustain itself from the inside out instead of the outside in, that's the real transformation. That is real vampiric transformation. That is real self-deification. Because you're then sustaining yourself, knowing your own divinity, knowing your own potential, and more than anything, understanding that your inner child is automatically enough without needing something outside of itself in order to feel enough, in order to sustain its illusion of what it thinks it is. So yes, it reverses your energy field, but in the sense that you become optimally magnetic by understanding your true value, your true potential, and understanding that that exists within the void. And because it's a paradox, when you are willing to stop looking, you are going to, or stop seeking, receiving has more emanating effect. So that is going to have a more sort of prominent emanation and ripple effect in the lives of those around you as well. In a sense, you become, you could say, a walking aspect of void consciousness that destroys illusion and recreates truth. So that means that the vampiric energy can be used to basically devour somebody's illusions and help them to see the truth. And this is where this can have extreme benefits if you are interested in actually mentoring other people and helping other people go through this significant process of metamorphosis as well. So I think that is everything that I needed to speak about in today's video. Big subject, so much to it, but I'm going to leave it there. I have just added a new initiatory ritual to my membership program called the Transfiguration of the Death Star, which is a Daathic initiation, but it does not initiate you into the abyss. Okay, that would be very dangerous without going through the different Qliphothic spheres. What it does is that it attunes your system, consecrates your energy field and nervous system with the perfect quantity of void energy that your system is needing to be able to safely undergo its transformation. This is very safe, highly tested and trialed ritual of initiation that is intended to get stronger every time that you receive it as your system shifts more into resonance with the void energy, with your deep unconscious. The more void energy you will be able to process, absorb, and metabolize, and the more transformation you will go through. But it's not for the faint of heart. It will shatter false constructs. It will take you on a very big process of transformation. This is ideal for those who are wanting to explore the Qliphothic realms, who are wanting to explore the Qliphothic spheres, go through that process of metamorphosis. Also check out my other membership tiers as well that have access to other initiatory rituals, other practices and path workings, as well as my Patreon. Links are in the description. So thank you guys. If this video was helpful to you, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.